Welcome back, everyone. Our next roundtable, Rebuilding Economies After COVID-19, features the Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo. WGA's chair, Governor Kate Brown of Oregon, will moderate the conversation among governors and the Secretary. They will discuss the effects of COVID-19 on state and local economies, as well as actions that states and the federal government can take to promote economic prosperity throughout the West. Governor Brown.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm so pleased to introduce our next speaker and to be joined by my fellow governor, Lou Guerrero from Guam. Secretary Raimondo serves currently as the Secretary of Commerce. In that role, she has primary responsibility for a vital mission to spur good-paying jobs, empower entrepreneurs to innovate and grow, and help American workers and businesses compete in the global marketplace. This important work is even more critical at a time when our Western state economies are dealing with the impacts of the COVID pandemic and attempting to get back on a positive track. I should also note that the Department of Commerce does a lot of other work that directly impacts our states. The National Weather Service is housed at Commerce as part of its weather forecasting capabilities, which we all appreciate. The Weather Service provides critical flood risk information to states and local communities, certainly a life-saving service. The department's National Marine Fisheries Service manages our nation's threatened and endangered marine species. It's a very broad portfolio with a lot of challenges. Before her arrival at Commerce, Secretary Raimondo served 6 years as the governor of Rhode Island, the first woman elected to that position. During her tenure, Rhode Island made record investments in infrastructure, education, and job training. She also served as the state's general treasurer, elected to the post in 2010. In that role, she focused on solving the state's $7 billion unfunded pension liability. Secretary Raimondo is a Harvard grad, a Rhodes Scholar, and earned her doctorate at Oxford University and her law degree at Yale. She's been incredibly successful in the private sector, serving as Senior Vice President at Village Ventures and founding Point Judith Capital, a venture capital firm. Madam Secretary, it is a delight to have you with us and to have a former governor running the ship at Commerce. Welcome to WGA. We really look forward to the conversation and exploring opportunities to work with you on the challenges facing our nation and, of course, the Western states. Take it away.
Thank you, Kate. It's so nice to see you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that generous introduction, and thank you to the WGA for having me and for all the work that you do. Governors have been truly on the front lines of the pandemic this past year and a half, and have had to innovate and be creative and act with urgency. And I commend each and every one of you for the work that you've done and the creativity and urgency with which you've acted. Now, of course, you're on the front lines of building back, as we say, building back better, building back more equitably, with a greater eye towards climate change and equity, and really leaning into some of the issues that have been long-standing even prior to the pandemic. And so today I'm eager to hear from you around how I can be supportive and helpful to you as you do the hard work of building back better, standing up your communities and your economies post-COVID and post-pandemic. I will say, having had the experiences being a governor, I know it's sometimes hard to navigate Washington, can be hard to figure out the details of particular federal programs, what's available to you in your state. And so I hope to be able to partner with you, be extremely accessible to you, and help you figure that out. Thanks to President Biden's rescue plan and some of the other initiatives that we're working on now, there are enormous amount of resources for states And so I would, and some of which run through the Commerce Department, others of which don't. But I just want to today extend to you my help in any way that I or my team can help governors, because if you've had a difficult year behind you, but the most important work, and in many ways the hardest work of rebuilding, is yet to come. And I look forward to working with all of you to do that and hearing from you today, what you're really grappling with and how we can best support you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'll take the first question, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague here. In Oregon, we are really focused on our recovery efforts of centering the voices of our historically underserved communities, our Black, our communities of color, our tribal, our Indigenous communities, and our rural communities. And we want to make sure that our recovery efforts are equitable in both serving urban and rural communities. Could you talk a little bit about how you're planning to engage with state and local leaders to ensure that these recovery efforts truly meet the needs of all of our communities?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And that's what I meant, obviously, in talking about building back more equitably. So there are a number of areas. I'll mention a couple. One is in broadband. It was on painful display during COVID how many Americans lacked broadband and how many of those Americans lived on tribal lands and in rural lands. And so we are, and the Department of Commerce through our NTIA manages all of the broadband work. So it's incredibly important that we get the money out to states so that you can make sure that every citizen in your state has access to broadband. Another area that we're working on here at Commerce is through our Economic Development Agency. The last bill appropriated $3 billion to the Department of Commerce for EDA. And being a former governor, I plan to distribute that money in a way that gives governors a great deal of flexibility so that you can meet the needs on the ground in your communities, which you know best who has been left behind. I would say more generally, everything that we are going to be doing in this administration, no matter what we do, is with an equity lens. In job training, in apprenticeships, in housing, everything that we are doing is to make sure that those who have historically been left behind will be included in our Build Back efforts.
Thank you. We are incredibly grateful for both the flexibility and the focus on equity. Lou, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kate. And I'd like to just take this opportunity, as this is the first opportunity I've had to really have a discussion with Secretary Raimondo. And I just wanted to make sure that I give you my deepest congratulations in taking off this really very significant and essential, I think, part of bringing back the community after we've just so much struggle through the pandemic. I also want to just say to you, Madam Secretary, that we have a lot in common. You were the first female governor. I'm the first female governor for Guam. You are also experienced in the financial industry, and so am I. I was the president and CEO of the Bank of Guam here. And lastly, you tackled the $7 billion unfunded pension liability of Rhode Island. And since I've been in office, I have now decreased our deficit from $83 million to now only 1.5 in an environment of the pandemic. So a lot of that had to do, and please extend my deepest appreciation to President Biden for his steadfast and persistence in the American Rescue Plan, because as a result of that, that's, I think, going to give us a long, long way in rebuilding our economy and rebuilding our tourism, as tourism is the biggest economy here in Guam. I have also had the pleasure of meeting Assistant Secretary Graves, and he and I have been in discussion about vaccine tourism here in Guam. We are getting a lot of requests from our U.S. allies, Japan, South Korea, and also Taiwan for vaccinations. And so we are now standing up a program where we can bring people in and also spur our economy and our tourism, and also provide vaccination that would help protect from a world level, from a global perspective, also against the pandemic. So I just want to thank you for those kinds of support from your Department of Commerce. The one question I have, Madam Secretary, is we have recently been designated as our coastal areas as critical habitats by the National Marine Fishery Services. And they have done that without really any input from us. And they have done that in the midst of a 5-year study of our coastal waters and corals without finishing that study and making this critical habitat designation. We've been in communication with them, and we are seeking a delay in this designation until the study has been done. We want to make sure the mapping is accurate. We want to make sure that really the corals that that are extinct or rare are really in our coastal waters. So if there's anything you could help us with in trying to delay that designation till maybe the 5-year study is over. We have not gotten a favorable response from them. But this is, again, very essential and significant for us. As you know, it will prevent us from fishing subsistence, and also from any kind of economic development in those waters, like underwater sea cables and so forth. So that's an area that is of concern to me. I also just want to ask you, how are you planning to implement economic development in the various states and territories so that we can really improve and increase our workforce development? I know that Department of Labor is tasked with that, but one of the things that we're doing here is apprenticeship work with the community colleges, and also bringing in private sector to hire these apprentices right after graduation. Thank you.
Excellent, Lou. By the way, it's great to see you. Again, it's nice to see you, and thank you for being with us. I know it's early in the morning where you are. Okay, so on the first question, I'll have my team follow up with you right away. That sounds like a reasonable request. We would have to get into the details, but that's exactly the kind of thing that I want to invite governors to come to me with, which is things that matter to your communities, that are specific, that I might be in a position to be able to help with. What you just asked about reports up to me through an agency called NOAA. NOAA is very science-based operation, fact-based operation, has incredible science expertise and tools, very dedicated to fighting climate change. So we will follow up with your office today and see what we might be able to do. With respect to the second point, we are very soon, I will be putting out announcements around investments that the Department of Commerce is going to be making in workforce development, apprenticeships, and worker training. And it will be done through a competitive process made available to all states and territories to have to compete. So, I guess I would say stay tuned on that in the coming weeks. We'll be getting that money out the door. But I couldn't agree more. I did an awful lot of this as governor, exactly what you say, bringing business together with training partners. And, people are struggling through enormous change in this economy. And we have to commit ourselves to making sure that everybody has a chance to get a good job despite the changes and the technological changes and the pace of change. And one way to do that is effective modern apprenticeship and job training initiatives. So I applaud you for the work you've done. And we will let you know when the money is coming out. I'd encourage you to apply because the money will be for you to expand the programs that it sounds like you're already doing.
Thank you.
All right. I'll take the next one, Secretary Raimondo. And speaking of climate change, in my state, and I think in many of the West Coast states, we are, well, all of the West Coast states, we are on a very aggressive path toward reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. And I know that the Biden-Harris administration also has some very ambitious goals. I think the challenge is supporting our communities and workers who are affected by this transition. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we can do to better support these communities and the hard workers while we work through this transition.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing this up. We need a just transition. We need a transition, and we need to go as fast as we can because climate change is here and unforgiving, and so we have to move. But it has to be a just transition, and that means providing significant support to folks who will be displaced. That means guaranteeing them that we're going to be there for them to help find them another job and giving them the job training necessary to get that job. The president is calling for massive investments through the American Jobs Plan for this just transition, exactly as you're talking about, including, by the way, building a civilian climate corps, putting people right to work right away in the climate work. But also, it's funny, I had lunch today with Secretary Granholm, Secretary of Energy, and she and I were talking about exactly this. And the truth is, there will be many jobs created in the move towards a cleaner energy future in, solar, wind, battery, electric vehicles, all, good jobs. But folks have to be trained to do those jobs, and we have to make sure that those jobs are in our communities. So the president is very mindful of that, and his jobs package, which is now before Congress, has a great deal of support to address exactly the issue that you talk about.
Great, thank you. Lou, do you have another question?
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I just wanted to add to the climate change also. Here in our island, we have been working very closely with our Pacific brothers and sisters in doing a more regional climate change economy and a green economy. And we've been meeting with these Pacific Island presidents, and we have really been in a strategic direction to decrease, to preserve 30% of the waters, and I think it's 70% of the lands. And we're all working very feverishly to make that happen. Here in Guam, we actually stood up a G3 program campaign, Guam Green Growth, out of the University of Guam. We have partnered with the University of Guam, and we have a Center for Islands Sustainability through the University of Guam. And we are really using the framework of the United Nations goals and objectives, anywhere from social issues to lifting people up from poverty to equity issues and so forth. So we've really been on a good start with climate change here. One of the things that I'd like to do is bringing, like you said, Secretary, investors in to produce and to manufacture the solar panels here in Guam. We're so close to the Asian countries, and they do a lot of that. And so that's one of the things we're looking at. And definitely we're working with the Guam Community College to, like you said, train these people and have these local jobs here. The other thing that we're doing is pharmaceutical manufacturing. We're trying to see if we can get more investors come into Guam. Maybe we incentivize through tax rebates or tax credits, something like that. So I am very really encouraged by the movement and all the many good initiatives that are coming forward from the Biden-Harris administration, and look forward to that, to take the opportunity and the advantage to turn dollars into quality of life here in our island, and of course throughout the United States. As you know, we so desperately need that now, coming out from a very, dark pandemic. We are willing and ready, and certainly very cooperative, Madam Secretary, and we will look to your leadership also, and to your campaigns and programs that may help us with our initiatives here in Guam. So I just also wanted to say that when you talk about equity, we are also in a campaign here to get our self-determination, our political status, because we need to be very clear on how our relationship is going to be with the United States. So that's one of the things that we are moving forward. And I'm very hopeful the Biden-Harris administration will support us on that one because of their whole tenet and principle and philosophy on equity, self-determination, fairness, and justice to people. It's such a relief. It's such a refreshing environment to be in. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for saying all that. And there's so much in there for us to work on together.
Absolutely. Lou, I know your communities are already being impacted by climate change. In the last year, in addition to the pandemic, we had historic wildfires in September of last year, and then had a historic ice storm in February where we saw over 500,000 people lose power. So we are working feverishly here, both in my administration and with the Oregon legislature, to tackle climate change. And I am incredibly grateful to have such a strong federal partner in the Biden-Harris administration. Before we close out, I did want to catch up regarding our economic development in our rural communities. And I'm certainly well aware that a number of federal agencies, including yours, but also USDA and EPA and others, offer specific programs for rural economic development and infrastructure. I am absolutely committed to ensuring that our rural communities have the tools and resources to thrive. And I'd be curious to hear from you if there are opportunities to better coordinate the deployment of these resources and leverage funding in order to better serve our rural communities throughout the Western region.
Yeah, great question. The answer is yes, and forums like this and working with the WGA and my office, it will be an excellent way to do that. So, as I've mentioned a couple of times, the economic development monies that Congress is appropriating will come to the Department of Commerce. And I can promise you, Kate, that we are going to be all over the issue that you identify. I think COVID has opened everybody's eyes to inequities, not just on racial lines, but also on geographic lines. I mentioned earlier broadband, but it isn't just broadband. And the changes in our economy, like the move to digital, the transitions in energy, like you said, have disproportionately negatively affected folks who live in rural communities, which means that our focus will be disproportionately on helping people in those rural communities. I know Tom Vilsack, you mentioned USDA, is fantastic at this. Deb Holland at Interior is very focused on it, and the three of us have already started working collaboratively to make sure that we coordinate our efforts. And I want to say this, we want to work with you, governors, because, as I said before, you know better than anyone where the needs are in your communities. But rest assured that in the Biden-Harris administration, that the focus on equity includes remembering those who live in rural and tribal lands.
Great. Thank you so much. We have just seen the devastation between the pandemic and the ice storms and the wildfires. It certainly has wreaked havoc here throughout the state, but as you mentioned, it disproportionately impacts our communities of color, our low-income communities, our tribal communities, and our rural communities. So we are incredibly grateful for the focus of the Biden-Harris administration. I think, Lou, unless you have any further questions, are you good?
I just wanted to, before we sign off, just thank also Secretary Raimondo for, we got a $390,000 economic development grant, and it's to look at Guam's tourism repositioning study. Like you said, transitioning and also adjusting and changing over to things that are much more applicable to our island and also to our community. And I just want to again say I am so happy to be working with you, your team, and also the Biden-Harris administration because, like I said earlier, the focus is so much the practical and reality things to do. So thank you. And on behalf of the people of Guam, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Lou. And I know it's been a brutal year for you and the people in Guam, and I'm really excited to work with you as well.
Well, Madam Secretary, I think that concludes our conversation. We are incredibly grateful you're willing to take time out of your busy schedule to join us. This has been a really terrific conversation. We are so proud of your leadership, and we at the Western Governors look forward to working with you on areas of mutual interest. So thank you, thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jim Ogsbury.